Excellent. Right. Sorry, I was just looking for your previous questions that you guys sent in and I found them, so that's good. Good evening. So welcome to our August virtual event. So this is featuring Chris Romerly, who was featured in our August issue of the magazine. I know some of you might be lucky enough to have your September issues already, but we are still last day of August, hanging on there. So as Simon mentioned, yeah, please do keep on mute so no other little noises creep in. And yes, if you think of a question when we're chatting, do drop it into the chat and we'll get round to it towards the end. Yeah, let's introduce Chris. So Chris is architect, urban swimming expert, and now author of his new book, Sea Pools. Back in 2013, Chris accidentally designed a tidal pool for the River Thames in central London. And a decade later, Chris is now an urban swim expert. And his new book came out this month. It's a celebration and beautiful book about sea pools across the world. His Thames project is still ongoing, so we'll chat a bit more about that. Welcome, Chris. Give us a wave.
Good evening, everyone.
Chris has got his book in the background, so hopefully you'll be able to see him. Welcome. So you've been busy touring your book. You've just come back from the States.
I have, yes, and that wasn't. I could pretend that was a part of the tour, but it wasn't. That was actually a holiday. But
oh, was it? Oh, I thought it was work related. Oh, nice. Well, did you do much swimming? Where did you?
Not enough actually. We went to a place called Asbury Park, which is just on the New Jersey coast, which was a 1920s sort of a popular beach resort with some incredible architecture, which then fell into ruin and is now being refound, which was lovely. I think Bruce Springsteen was founded there, or found there, or played a lot there anyway, one or the other.
Oh, cool. Nice.
But interestingly, sorry, just on that matter, it cost £9 to get onto $9 to get onto the beach.
Oh, you had to pay?
Yeah.
Oh,
and I was like, well, hang around.
I had to pay for the beach in Italy.
Yeah, no, that wasn't.
Did you get anything for that? A sunbed?
No, those were another $10.
Oh my goodness!
I was like, well, us Brits are missing out on something. We could be cashing in on this.
How do they do that? How can you ticket a stretch?
You have a little wristband.
But what, they fence sections off?
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
Wow!
Well, no, the whole promenade is fenced. I mean, yes, you could jump in, but if you went before 8 o'clock, then you're okay. Well, before 9 o'clock, you could have a swim. But I imagine someone was patrolling the beach, which didn't feel like it was that democratic space which we all love.
Yeah. Well, that puts our private river access to.
Yes.
You can't even get on the coast. Interesting. And the New York have got that lovely potential pool, haven't they? Look, it's a cross. I forgot what it's called.
Plus pools.
Plus pool, that's it.
Yeah.
Alexa off.
Do you know where they are with that? Because that's in the Hudson, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I do know where they are with that. I talked with them not so long ago just to exchange notes on where we were with our project and where they were with their project. They're a few years ahead of us, and they are at a point where they're helping the city council rewrite policy as to access to the waterway, which in all my whatever it is now 8 years of doing Thames Bath, I hadn't actually thought of that as an option. I was being a bit more sort of gung-ho that we would win through eventually, but maybe I do need to get inside the Department of Transport and rewrite some policy about swimming in rivers, urban rivers. Yeah.
Well, I've kind of jumped the gun a bit here, but I thought perhaps you could, for those who don't know you, I mean, you've sort of become a little bit of an urban swim expert across Europe, I would say, well, the world, because you've just done a big project in Australia. So, tell us a bit about yourself. For those who don't know, you're a swimming architect. How does that happen? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, yeah, exactly. Paper and water don't really mix that well. I trained as an architect, and I run a practice called Studio Octopi, and for many years we were doing private residential jobs, advertising agencies. We did an arts centre, an outdoor theatre. And then suddenly there was this competition for future ideas for the banks of the River Thames. And when I saw the notification for that competition, I was actually in Zurich on holiday, swimming with my family in Lake Zurich. And anyone who's been to Lake Zurich will know that the city literally just runs up against the lake, and there's lots of sort of organized swim spots along the lake. It's all very civilized, beautifully clean. And I just thought, wow, gosh, well, I mean, if they're swimming in this lake, then why aren't we swimming in the river? And it wasn't until I got back to London and did a little bit digging around that I then found, I actually found Caitlin Davis and her wonderful book, Downstream, A History of Swimming in the Thames, which I would encourage you all to read. And that just opened my eyes to the enormous history of swimming in the Thames, because of course before the bathhouses and pools of that sort, everyone learned to swim in the wild, so to speak. And if you lived in London, the only place you could swim, or one of the few places you could swim, would be in the Thames. And so that kind of got us thinking, and we designed a pool to go alongside the Thames. Some of it was floating, some of it was fixed. And as Ella said, one of the fixed pool was designed as like a rock pool, like a sea pool, that it filled up on the high tide. The Thames, for those who don't know, has a 6-meter tidal range right in the center of town. So we had a pool which refreshed itself at high tide and then dropped away, and then you could swim in the river water. So we presented this scheme at the Royal Academy as part of this. It was an open call, just an ideas competition, and the Evening Standard got hold of it and put it in the paper. And before I knew it, most of London knew about it, and there was a lot of conversation going on as to why this could never happen. So we cutting a very long story short, but we did a whole series of different iterations of this design of a floating pool. Initially, it was a vision for after the super sewer had been built down the middle of the river, which is taking out 96% of the sewage, which is currently dumped in the river every time the more than 2 millimeters of rain falls, for example. And then the later versions were actually said we were deciding that they could be put in sooner than the finishing of the super sewer, and it would filter the crap, for want of a better word, out of the water, and you would have a clean body of river water, gently warmed, and in you would get. And it did sort of catch the imagination of London, and then it stretched in a slightly bonkers fashion all the way to places like Singapore and Australia, and suddenly every publication was printing these images, which was brilliant. But it did slightly elevate us into swimming architects. We then got a chance to design a concept pool for Melbourne in Australia, for a similar floating pool for the Yarra. And anyway, so we got very into pools. And then alongside that, we started to work on lidos and restoring lidos. And we are currently working on Grange Lido in Cumbria, which is a grade 2 listed incredible creation on the edge of Morecambe Bay. And that's a very long, slow project, but it's very much on the move. And we're working in Aberdeenshire on Tarlair, which is a 1932, in fact, tidal pool and boating lake and Art Deco pavilion. And we're working on the west coast of Scotland on Saltcoats bathing pond, which hasn't had access to it since the 1980s, and was also built in 1932. And we've just started work on a new tidal pool in Yavaland on the Isle of Wight. So yes, I think that answers your question in quite a lot of detail.
Yeah, and your business partner isn't really a swimmer, is he?
No, I slightly say that as a wind up to him, but I've got him into water, but he does prefer doing private residential projects, sort of high-end private residential. But I've seen him swim. He can swim. He just doesn't like to get his head wet, I think.
It's not his hobby.
No.
Your beautiful book that came out that's behind you. All this kind of work kind of led to this book and this I guess research into other sort of similar tidal pools and things that you were kind of exploring in the Thames. So tell us about your book and how that came about and what people can find inside it.
Sure. I mean, the book was delightfully simple. I sort of always heard people telling stories about how they get a book deal, and I feel incredibly honoured and treasure this tiny little story with a lot until my last days. That I just had this idea. I thought, why don't I look into UK tidal pools? These things seem to be rather overlooked. And did some Googling, and I found, oh, there's lots in Cornwall and some in Scotland and a few in Kent. Yeah, amazing. So I just grabbed some images, put some text together, literally a couple of paragraphs, made it look pretty in a PDF, and sent it off to Batsford, who had recently published the book called Lido, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which has got a section of a good cross section of Lidos around the world by Christopher Beanland. And they replied within 2 days going, yeah, this is great, let's do it. There's only one condition, that you do it on the whole world. And you find tidal pools elsewhere in the world, presumably they exist, which sort of sent a shudder through me, thinking, God, this is going to be a mighty project. And then I started to look, and obviously on the east coast of New South Wales in Australia, you've got an incredible collection of some of the finest ocean pools, they call them there. I then realized that South Africa had probably almost as many as Australia, if not more, slightly less looked after, but that they exist, particularly in Cape Town. And then the fun and games really started, because then it was like, well, there must be some others out there. And I began to look at the west coast of France, and I found a whole series of tidal pools, really from Granville and Saint-Malo all the way west from there. And then Ireland suddenly cropped up, and then some really curious ones, but maybe I shouldn't tell you too much. But anyway, so it was fascinating finding all these pools, and each one of them has a lovely story to them. And so the book tries to capture in, I don't know, 200, 300 words on each one, just a little bit of the magic about these places. And it's desperately tries not to be a travel guide. This is how you swim in this pool. This is how you get access to this pool. And actually just tries to open up some of the little secrets about how it formed and the magic behind these places.
Yeah, and these are man-made. I mean,
you're right. Yes, I should clarify that. I always forget. I always assume everyone knows, and then people go to me. Yeah, so you mean like Gurrock in Scotland? And I go, no, that's a seawater pool, not a sea pool. So yes, these are all man-made rock pools, for want of a better term. So they are probably, some of them are naturally occurring rock pools, which have then been dammed or adapted or cut out of the rock to make them into pools. And usually you get a concrete wall on at least one side, if not, some of them are completely new, so you get four sides. So I was really interested in the ones which were either completely brand new or stitched into the rock, basically. I was less interested, and they all had to be I was going to say all of them, that's not strictly true, but as many as possible should be below the mean high water mark, so that they all naturally refilled with water at the high tide. I tried to avoid too many of the pumped pools, because then you get into seawater pools rather than tidal pools.
Yeah. And did you find that there was a common reason across the world why these things were created in the first place? Often it's because the tide goes out a long way. What's the common kind of...
the three main reasons, really. I hadn't thought about this before, but it came very clear very, very, very quickly, really. you've given one away. It is the long tide. So places like, for example, St. Malo, where it has some of the largest tidal ranges. I think it's about 8 meters tidal range there, which is extraordinary. So there's a pool there, which actually isn't in the book, which is why a volume 2 is almost essential. Bon Secours, I think it's called. And that has I think a 3.5, 4 meter diving board on top of the perimeter on the seaward side of the perimeter wall. The wall itself is probably at least 3.5, maybe 4 meters high itself. So at high tide, the whole thing is covered by water. You just see the very top of the railings of the top board of the diving board. And at low tide, you can walk all around the base of the wall.
Incredible.
So it's amazing, absolutely mammoth. So it's to do with the tide, and then they often occur in places where access to the sea is tricky or dangerous because of the rocks mainly. So Mousehole in Cornwall, for example, which is another one of my favorites, was built because it's just a tricky area to get into the water safely. So they built a tidal pool there for the kids, and it does the job. It allows the kids to bathe safely in salt water. And so you see them in rocky areas, and you also see them in locations like Australia and South Africa in particular, where there are nasty creatures in the sea ready to eat you. So a lot of the colonial arrivals obviously couldn't resist getting into the water in the 1800s. It was very much fashionable to be in salt water, and they were all being eaten by great whites and whatnot. So they adapted some of the traditional the First Nations fish traps into the pools, or form their own pools from that.
And do you have a particular favorite? I mean, I know that's a difficult thing to answer. I always hate it when people ask me that question.
I think you might be trying to catch me out here, because I might have given you my favorite in the article, and now you're asking me again to see if I can remember what I told you.
If it matches up.
I know, and I've purposely been telling every interview and magazine commentary I do, I've been purposely telling different favorites each time, so I can't get caught out like this. I do have a lot of favorites, and tonight, Ella, my favorite is probably the one in Namibia, which is nearly finished me off. I might even try and hold it up and see if the camera can cope. No, the camera can't cope with that. But it's on the Namibian coast, and it's in a place called Langstrand. And I found it by one of my evenings skimming the Google Maps coastline of southern Africa, as one does.
You do.
And I was like, oh my God, what the hell is that? It's very geometric. I think in the book I describe it as like a sort of a deserted Star Wars set. It feels like it's been designed by George Lucas from above. It has sort of galaxy type feel to it. It has a long pier which comes out, and then off the pier it has the tidal wall and a series of circular, I presume they were kids pools or plunge pools. There's 3 of them, I think. Yeah, 3 of them, which then sort of cascade down into the larger tidal pool area. And the sea in that area is totally emits an amazing emerald green in the photograph, and it has this golden sand which rolls all the way down from the Namib desert, I think, all the way down to the beach. The sea looks big and rough, so it must have been quite a thrilling place. And they built it, just checking my notes, 1987, and it was built when South Africa was still Namibia didn't exist. It was part of South Africa, and I think there were Germans who commissioned it in the hope of making Langstrand a new holiday destination. And it's quite an ambitious project. And as I say, the landscaping goes beyond the tidal pool back inland into this sort of series of geometric shapes. But it nearly finished me off because I found it relatively early on in my research. and then I just couldn't find anything on it. I mean, it literally every avenue I went down went to a dead end. And I repeatedly played around with the idea of just dropping it. And it got to the point where the publishers were like, maybe just cut this one. And I was like, there's just no chance I'm going to cut it. It's too good, too good. I then pushed a bit harder, and I managed to get hold of a pilot. Well, it's not a commercial pilot, just a leisure pilot who had a small plane. And she said, I'm happy to take a picture for you from the air if you want. And I was like, oh, okay,
Wow.
that's pretty amazing. So I was like, yes, please, that would be great, thank you. So she did. She then, a week later sent me a low res version of it, and I was like, oh my god, this is even better than it looked from the ground shots. So I had the image, and I had no idea even when it was built, and then gradually just began to. I got to the point of actually emailing cafes which I could find on Google Maps, who were along the beachfront, in the hope they knew someone who could find someone. Someone very kindly went out to their cafe and took a picture of the stone plaque at the sort of land side of the pier, which had then the builder listed on it.
Wow.
Which then the builder, then I contacted the builder's son, I think it was, who directed me to the South African landscape practice who'd done it. And then I eventually found the coastal engineer who effectively designed the pool to make it work. And
That's
there's a
incredible.
huge inland lake as well, which takes it's a seawater lake inland. Well, when I say inland, it's 20 meters inland, which has a pipe connecting with the tidal pool. So you get both an inland saltwater lake and the tidal pool topping up at high tide.
Wow, what a great piece of engineering.
Yeah, so the whole thing, I mean, it was just amazing. And then this guy, this coastal engineer who's retired, was just completely overexcited that I'd found him, and his paper, which he presented in Israel in 1988 at a coastal engineering conference, was what I wanted. And he dug out a typed copy for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great piece of research.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to go find my book and I'm going to read more about that one.
Yeah.
And in this, I mean, I haven't traveled the world enough to know if it's a common thing, but in the UK, some of these pools are falling into disrepair. They aren't cared for. Is it a similar pattern across the world? What is it? Why are they let go?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, I was lucky enough to be invited to a tidal pool workshop by a friend of mine who's also an architect working on tidal pools in Australia, and I spoke at that, and it was a brilliant conference. And not only was it held at Wiley's, which is probably one of the most famous tidal pools. So we were sitting in a marquee on the deck above Wiley's, hearing the water crashing over the sea wall, and I had a swim at lunchtime in the pool.
Oh, lovely.
But it was full of people who are either obsessed about tidal pools or who manage or supervise their maintenance up and down the eastern coast of Australia. And what was very comforting, particularly because I'd started working on two of them in Scotland, was to hear that the problems we were having or experiencing are problems all over the world. So tidal pools obviously just fill up with stones. Every time there's a storm, the seabed just gets dumped into the tidal pool. They get filled with sand. Councils come along to repair the walls, and they don't think about the height of the wall, and they suddenly raise them above the mean high water mark. So then they don't refresh any longer, and then everyone's like, "Oh, why didn't we think of that?" And it's like, so all these issues, but they are. I mean, I think the amazing thing about these spaces is they are trying to defy nature. They're trying to battle with nature, and you will always lose against nature. There's no doubt about it. So as soon as you let these pools go, nature will have them back at the click of a finger. And that's what makes them, for me, slightly magical as well, that we're trying to find a space where nature and man can live in harmony, but it doesn't exist really. Nature just wants it back. And I loved hearing some of the stories of people who have tried to help these pools. Back in Cape Town, Lisa Beasley, who I think started off as a marine ecologist and a diver. She swims at St James's, which is again is a very famous one in Cape Town, and she noticed that at every third week, every month on the low tide, the council were coming along and emptying the pool and jet washing it down with chemicals to clear it out, to clear it of all the stuff in there, and make it look like a swimming pool again. And she campaigned long and hard to stop them doing that. And also they were painting white zinc paint over the perimeters of these pools, for good reason, to stop them being slippery. But obviously white zinc paint isn't a great thing to put in a marine environment. It just kills anything which comes anywhere near it. So she campaigned to the city council and got them to agree that they wouldn't empty the pools and that they would only clean the top surface, as in the perimeter walls where you walk, with a jet washer and water. She actually had to buy the jet washer for the council to get them to agree to that. But anyway, it did happen. And that was a lovely story. And then she said what was just so rewarding about it was that then suddenly this pool just opened up to a whole new user group. So suddenly you had kids coming down from school with their snorkels and their wetsuits, because the water can get quite cold down that way. And they were snorkeling around the tidal pools, looking at the marine life in the pool, which previously had been washed out. There was nothing was allowed to go in there because it was a swimming pool. Now it was a rock pool, or was close to a rock pool without being a rock pool. But it suddenly became, the biology classes could happen down there for kids, and they could understand marine life safely, because of course they couldn't snorkel in off the coast there. It's far too rough most of the time. So that really got me quite excited, because I then thought, well, actually there are so many opportunities here in the UK for taking these tidal pools to the next stage as well, and how can we ensure that the marine life which is in these pools is looked after, but also enjoyed by even more people. You don't have to be a swimmer to enjoy a tidal pool. So that is one of the ways we managed to talk ourselves into working with Swim the Wight on the Isle of Wight, that we somehow produce an eco pool which can be used for studying marine life, both at kids' school level as well as all the way up to university and beyond. And it takes it, you get this lovely little blurring of territory where academics are sort of cheek by jowl with swimmers, all enjoying this one space.
No, I shared with you that I used to hate sea pools when I was a kid, because to me they were just a big fishing net, where the jellyfish and crabs would collect. But thankfully I'm a bit more appreciative of these kind of things these days. But I do think that's a really lovely crossover for sure, and something for the future of the pools.
Yeah.
The work you've been doing with your architect practice with pools, not just sea pools, but lidos and things, is really fascinating. You're part of the Future Lido group. Talk to us about that, because that's some really great work that's happening there.
Yeah, so Future Lido's Future Lido group sort of came about through there was a couple of national Lido conferences. I think I went to one. And there was clearly a real interest and passion around these Lidos. I mean, stating the obvious, but the fact that someone had managed to pull together a national Lido conference. There was also Emma Pusel's brilliant book, The Lido Guide, which I assume everyone has and adores. And the exciting thing about that is there's a second edition coming out as well. And so on the back of that, myself, Deborah Aden, Michael Wood from Northumbria University. We kind of sat down and thought, well, actually, we should bring the community together to understand why these things are so important in the community, as if we don't know already, and then try and progress the thinking around how we're going to get a next generation of Lidos working better for us. We're going to do some myth busting. Lidos can make money. They're not just drains on public finances, and they do a champion job in the community in reducing impact on the NHS, including improving your health and all the stuff we know around swimming. And Deborah amazingly applied to the National Lottery, a Heritage Fund, for some funding to do a research project, which would culminate in a toolkit to help Lido campaigners get a leg up with their proposals. So this was particularly amusing to me because I was gently making a few bucks on the side by doing endless feasibility studies for Lidos for community groups who'd managed to get some funding from somewhere. So this was effectively taking all that knowledge and giving it away for free. But it seemed it is for the better good that actually so sorry, when this toolkit is finished, what will be available to the Lido community, both operating Lidos and Lido campaigners, is a easy to use, straightforward guide on how to prepare your campaign so it makes sense, so you don't fall at the first hurdle. So it'll be from the very start of finding a site suitable for a 25-meter pool is very different to a site for a 50-meter pool. A site which can hold a cafe, a restaurant, changing rooms, and community room is very different to one which has a whole fully blown gym, leisure complex offering. So getting that information to start off with, and then understanding how you work out who owns the land, what's the likelihood of that land being leased to an organization to run a Lido or to look into funding for a Lido, all the way through to we've then got sort of 5 key chapters within that toolkit, which we have 5 experts working on it. We have business sustainability. So how is your Lido campaign or your Lido business plan going to work? Does it work? Have you done, this is how you should do your market analysis. This is how you might write an outline business plan. What makes those viable? We have a lot of conversations about cafes and Lidos, and everyone's immediate assumption is a Lido has to have a cafe because that's what makes it financially viable, which isn't far from the truth, apart from if you have a Lido positioned near a high street full of cafes, the last thing you need is another cafe. So it's about that kind of understanding. And it sounds very obvious, but it's very easy to fall into the trap of just going, all Lidos have cafes, therefore we'll put a cafe in there. And then we've got environmental sustainability. So we've done with Andy from Web Yates doing a whole load of work into how the next generation of Lidos can be, the operational costs can be reduced dramatically and in an environmentally sustainable way. So gas boilers, oil boilers, burners, whatever, for heating the water and the air in your pavilion is gone. We're over that. Well, almost over it. Sea Lanes managed to put gas boilers in, but that's another conversation. But we want to look at, how do we do ground source heat pumps, heat exchangers? Can we get the energy from the passing river? Do photovoltaic solar panels work? How much will they give us? So all of that at the very high level, but all of that information will be in there. What's the next section? There's a section on advocacy, which effectively is the whole thing of myth busting and making sure that the people who make the decisions mainly in central government, but also in local government, understand what these lidos are for and why they're so good. They aren't just a place for the council to lose loads of money and for people to have a great time in some water. They are absolutely critical pieces of our townscape, our cityscape, for people to meet at and swim at. It is as much social as it is sport, and probably more social than sport, to be honest. And the final section, which obviously is the least most important, is the design quality section, which is my section, and I am presenting in my bit in the toolkit. It's a massive section, but it looks at where you get your information from to work out how many changing rooms you might need, how many changing cabins you might need, outdoor showers, the important aspect of making sure that you work with an architect who knows what they're doing, who's going to create joyful and delightful spaces which people are going to want to spend time in, because you're probably not going to be outdoors the whole time. You may want to sit in the cafe, and if you have to sit in a miserable box, you ain't going to come back for more coffee. So you need to make sure that you're getting the best out of your indoor and outdoor spaces. And the pool is designed so everyone can get into it, which, we have a lot of issues with the current sort of aging stock of lidos, where either they're listed or find it difficult to be adapted to ensure that everyone of all abilities, physical, mental, everything abilities, can get into the pool safely and feel safe there.
Yeah.
So we're doing a little bit of work on that, and that's pretty much it. It's quite an undertaking.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's going to be such an amazing, resource. And I suppose I'm going to wrap up my bit of this. I mean, I've incorporated people's questions into that, so hopefully most people's questions have been answered. And if not, do put your question in the chat. But I just kind of wanted a sort of a summary, really, that you're obviously very optimistic about the future of pools and urban swimming. I mean, we've seen that the River Seine in Paris is looking set to be open for swimming, although I know they've had some teething issues recently. But as someone who's doing all this work, I guess you're very optimistic about the future of outdoor swimming.
I am actually, and you know what, and I read an awful lot, as we all do, a lot of moaning about, quite rightly, about the rubbish in our rivers and our oceans and whatever, and lidos struggling to heat the water and all of this, and it's really grim to read. And I hope by doing the work we do, we can help with that. But it struck me actually, funny enough, when I was in Australia doing a bit of work for Sydney Water, believe it or not, they employed us to design, well, it wasn't a design, it was do some concept designs again for new swim sites across Greater Sydney. And what I was absolutely staggered by is that the Australians have the Sydney siders have an amazing East Coast landscape. We all of us would die to be there. You've got incredible beaches, amazing water, tidal pools, and in the city centre there's some incredible outdoor pools which leave our lidos looking, even the new ones, looking ridiculous. Well, not ridiculous, but looking very average. But then I started to ask some questions about the rivers and the lakes inland, and they're like, we just don't swim in them. They're just polluted. There's just nowhere to swim inland. And if you're and even on the western fringes of Sydney, so the further inland Sydney, they have an unbelievable lack of swimming facilities, despite being near reservoirs, rivers, whatever. And that was the reason they came all the way to London to work with us, because they could see what we were trying to do about improving access to water for pleasure. And I was staggered how few swim sites they had away from the city centre and this amazing East Coast. So it made me think that we're actually very blessed with the range of swimming we have, particularly, I'm a Londoner, so particularly, for example, in London, we have an incredible range of facilities within relatively easy reach for all of us. It's not the same across the country, but we're not in bad shape. If we could just get that water clean, I think we'd have a pretty treasured offering.
Yeah. Oh, it's been fascinating. So there's no questions currently, but if anyone's got a
I've got
question.
one.
Oh, Simon, start us off.
I'm allowed. Chris, how many of these pools did you manage to visit for writing the book?
Oh, Simon, it's always a good question, isn't it? Sadly, as you will understand, my advance was barely sufficient to get me much beyond the end of my road. I went to the west coast of France, which I would strongly recommend because there are more tidal pools along there than, well, it's not far off what it's like in Australia, to be honest. And I knew nothing about any of those. I went on an amazing road trip around, well, across Ireland to Dublin, south to Vico, Baths, and then across to Galway, and then up to another one of my favourites, Belmullet. If you haven't been to Belmullet, you need to go to Belmullet. Well, you need to buy the book to read about Belmullet, but Belmullet is like a concrete box which was dropped into a beach of a town which can't be more than a few thousand people, and it's literally on the furthest western point of Ireland. I mean, next stop is the States. And they built this thing because the council refused to build them a leisure centre to swim in. And it is again just the most beautiful. You go on their Facebook page and you see the most beautiful pictures of kids and families and community coming together around a tidal pool. And that was one of the places which actually inspired me to think about liquid piazzas. You know, these places are liquid piazzas. These are places which are so critical to our towns and cities, where people come and meet and have fun together, exercise, muck around. So yes, sorry, Simon, back to your question. And Australia, I had a quick snoop around Sydney pools there.
Okay, and then, well, the floor is open for anyone to ask a question. Either raise your hand, put it in the chat, or just shout out. But while you just think of your question, Chris, do you want to do it just a 2-minute pitch for your book? Why should people buy your book, and where can they buy it?
This is the best book on the market about sea pools. Oh, is that someone challenging me? It is the best book. My book is very close to me. I got so wrapped up in the little stories about each of the pools that I would encourage you to buy it, just to dip into all the magical stories around these pools. And some of them are very familiar, and you probably know about them, but others are very obscure. Lady Bassett's baths in Cornwall is an extraordinary, and the smallest one I found, which is literally the shape of a bath. Well, there are about 7 of them on the beach, and they were all set at different heights up the beach, so that Lord Bassett's wife, Lady Bassett, could bathe at all times of the tide in fresh water. And those were carved straight out of the rock. There was no concrete involved there. All the way up to Montmagny in Cape Town again, which has a very, very dark political angle to it when it was built, the peak of apartheid era, but is mammoth in its scale, and Strandfontein as well along that beachfront. They are epic in their proportions. So if that's not a good enough sales pitch, I don't know what is.
Yeah, good.
And where should people buy it?
Oh, you should buy it from your local bookshop. It is available everywhere. And if it isn't in your local bookshop, also ask them why it's not there.
Excellent.
Okay.
We've had a great question from Mark Reynolds, who's asked, if someone had 1 or 2 weeks for a vacation and wanted to base it around visits to this type of site, where would you recommend they go?
Well, depends what time of year it is, Mark. But let's say we're going to go to the southern hemisphere because it's raining in Europe. Sydney's a very, very obvious one, so I'm going to encourage you to go to Cape Town, maybe even up to KwaZulu-Natal, up the coastline there, and do some less polished tidal pools up there. And then when it's summer in the north, I I really want to go to the one in Norway, which I think is one of the most recent, if not the most recent, to be built. And it was built on the, I guess it's northern, well, it's probably about halfway up, I think, on the west coast of Norway. And it was built as part of a property development along the coastline there, and it looks stunning. So go there in the summer. I'm not sure I'd go there in the winter, even though I like cold water. I think that might be pushing it.
Excellent. Well, there aren't any other questions, but I mean, that's fine. Oh, hang on.
Wow, someone's in Portland, Oregon. Great
yeah,
stuff.
we have a lovely global community here. So 5th of September it's coming out.
Yes, I should say that, shouldn't I? It's out in Australia and the UK, which and it's out in the US on the 5th of September.
Brilliant. Well, it would make a lovely Christmas present. That I've just said the C word on the 31st of August. But thank you so much, Chris. It was really, really lovely to chat to you. And thank you to our lovely audience. We will be here next month. I haven't firmed up our next guest yet, but we will be in touch. And there'll be a recording of this for anyone who wants to rewatch or share. Thank you very much, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Yeah, lovely.
Oh, I should also say there's some lovely pictures of sea pools on our Instagram, my Instagram profile, which is at sea.pools. And you'll find more sea pools than you could possibly imagine.
Excellent. All right. Well,
Great.
Good evening, everyone. Take care.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Chris.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.